it appears that some fans might have got their own way. Richard Hughes, according to Pete O'Rourke of Footy Insider 24/7, has announced that Richard Hughes is set to leave his role at the club and is currently working his notice period at AFC Bournemouth. Now, Bill Foley, of course, has shown where his loyalty lies in this, and I guess that this really shows that Bill is siding with Andoni Iraola. Maybe he feels that the club haven't recruited properly from Richard Hughes and Neil Blake, and therefore he's making these changes. Now, um, I'm really hoping that he has a contingency plan in place now. If this is true, which there's nothing to say it is or it isn't at this moment in time, this has been reported. Until it comes from Mark McAdam or Chris Temple, take it with a pinch of salt. Please take it with a pinch of salt, because those guys know more than any other reporter does. Of course, everybody's got their ears to the floor trying to get the latest material, but it always seems to be that Mark McAdam and Chris Temple will only announce it once it is factual. Of course, I'm telling you about this. I'm not saying that this is fact. And personally, um, I hope it's not, but others may do. Now, let's look at this. I'm hoping that Bill Foley hasn't made this decision because of the loud minority of our fan base. Those loud minority that were calling for Gary O'Neill to be sacked have now managed to get Richard Hughes ousted out the door. Now, do remember, Richard Hughes was a man who brought through some really, really good talent whilst he was at the club. He might still be at the club, post December. So, like I say, pinch of salt. But if it is true, at the end of the day, he has done a very, very good job. You look at the likes of Ben Pearson, a player that he signed for a phenomenal fee from Preston North End. Now, I know that Ben didn't make it in the Premier League. No, that's fair enough. However, and this is a big however, sometimes these players are needed to get you into that top division. Let's look at Robbie Brady, for example, and Shriki Dembele, for example. I like Shriki Dembele, but those sort of players, they have bought in players and also got good deals for the club. They were also, and before anybody else knocks Neil Blake and Richard Hughes and says, "Oh no, they're rubbish, they're rubbish, they're rubbish, they're rubbish," do remember they're the sort of people that managed to get the top dollar for Nathan Ake, considering we had been relegated as well in the middle of COVID. They were the people that managed to get a sizable fee for Callum Wilson, despite we being relegated and we was in the middle of COVID. That is no fault of Neil or Richard. At the end of the day, that was something that happened because of the situation in the world at that time. You know, Unfortunately, it was one of those. So they've already got good profit margins. Now, if they hadn't got those good profit margins and sold Nathan Ake, and this is a big thing, if they had kept hold of Nathan Ake and kept him going throughout that season, then might have been that player got despondent because he wanted to go to Manchester City. You can't rule that out there. So there might have been some animosity there towards AFC Bournemouth. But secondly, you know, it's a case that we needed to cut our cloth because of the amount of wages that we were spending. We had to, of course, reduce that because we're now getting championship money in. Now, luckily, we was out of the championship within 2 seasons. You look at some of the sides, well, you name them, stuck in there for years, and it all goes belly up, especially teams that drop out of the Premier League. So Richard Hughes, Neil Blake. Richard deserves a full round of applause for what he has done at this football club. Look at the players that we have signed as well. Now, everybody wanted Alex Scott. Everybody was clamoring over Alex Scott. You know, a lot of other Premier League clubs were clamoring over Alex Scott. Richard Hughes managed to get Alex Scott. And, you know, some people might criticize him and say, oh, he's not very good. He managed to get Alex Scott. Brilliant work, Richard. Again, top top notch. Now, there is some positions that I think we are generally weak in. I think up front we needed somebody to complement Solanke, not replace, but complement. Kiefer Moore, you know, is a little bit slow, but you know, can do that sort of role. I think Semenyo, I think he is too much like Solanke to play in that position, but he's decent enough to play on the left or just behind him. So that's absolutely fine. Semenyo is not a bad move. But I think we needed somebody to complement. However, you've got to be honest. Let's look at this. The club were looking at players to bring in that position. Now, to actually bring in a football player, you need to go to a club that is willing to sell that football player. And you have to meet that agreement. Now, there is no point of trying to sign somebody like Daka, who we was meant to be after from Leicester City. Now, I don't know this whole scenario of that, but you know, Leicester, you know, might not have wanted to sell Daka or let him go out on loan or whatever agreements were being talked about. Again, none of us really know. None of us really know unless you are Richard Hughes or Neil Blake. Um, but also, there could have been the scenario where Leicester was like, okay, yeah, we'll sell him, but we'll sell him for 30 million. And Richard Hughes and Neil Blake, sorry, got mixed up there, looked at each other and thought, no, that's not a good deal for us. That is sensible. Now, I've got a lot of time for Richard and Neil, and I think personally they have done a very, very good job in getting this club to where it is at the moment. You know, I know Eddie Howe is the main man. He's the man that put into place all the tactics and everything like that. But they've managed to actually get the players in that are going to enhance this football club. You look at Alex Scott. You know, how much could we sell Alex Scott for in 5 years' time, for example, when he's at his peak performance? The price could be endless. You look at, you know, you look at some of the, okay, yeah, there is that criticism of, okay, they've let Jefferson Lerma's contract expire. They've let Lloyd Kelly's contract expire. But there's another co-argument to this. If you was to stay in the Premier League, you know, it is better to have that sort of player like Jefferson, who is going to try be able to keep you there rather than selling him and risking. Now, because we let Jefferson Lerma go on a free to Crystal Palace, that's not, you know, the end of the world. What would have been the end of the world is, you know, let him go and get him relegated. You know, Crystal Palace might have signed him for 10 million because they knew his contract was coming to an expiry, might have signed him for 10 million. We get relegated. That 10 millions just wipes out straight away. Whereas Jefferson Lerma helps keep us up in that game against Leeds, and he fought till the very end. Jefferson did. He's kept us up. That 10 million is now is pocket change because we've got another year in the Premier League. Richard Richard and Hughes and Neil Blake have done a fantastic job, and I will be really, really disappointed, you know, to see Richard leave the club because he has brought in some good talent. You know, it's not through the want of not try, you know, not trying or whatever the bloody terminology is. What it is it's a case that sometimes these things happen in football. Sometimes you can't, you know, get your own way, and sometimes you have to walk away from deals. Look at Zaniolo. Now, Zaniolo, we walked away, or we went back in for that, but you know, effectively, that deal. Well, we spoke to the player. The player didn't want to come. Then he suggested he did want to come, and then of course, we'd already made a change. Now, if we had made that move, we could be without him for God knows how long. So these things happen in football. Um, the Ivan Toney situation at Brentford, again, these things happen in football. So Richard Hughes, full credit to him. I hope that Bill Foley is not listening to the big mouths, in our fan base, because they've already shown that they don't really know what they're on about. Because, of course, we got rid of Gary O'Neill, who's doing a very good job at Wolves, and got Iriola, who is struggling. Not saying that I think there is a good manager in there, but does he play the right football? Um, there's a lot of questions. I'm hoping he's not listening to people, because Richard Hughes is a good man, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done at AFC Bournemouth. Let me know what your opinions are on Richard, Neil, and yeah, we shall see you in the next one. Up the Cherries. Thanks for joining us.